Good evening. I would like to call to order the Kaiser Personnel Policy Committee. It is Monday, October 28th. And ask our city recorder, please call roll.
Councilor Reed?
Here.
Mayor Clark?
Here.
Council President Starr?
Here.
The first order of business is to approve the minutes from July. Were there any additions or corrections noted?
I make a motion to approve the July minutes.
Second?
July minutes have been moved and seconded as presented. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed signify by saying no. Motion passes unanimously. Next up is the Municipal Court Judge Observation Form Procedures. And I'll go to
I can
Mr. Lindsay.
cover that if you don't mind. If you notice in the minutes that you just put officially into the record, we came with a judicial form back then and took that in front of the council at large. And at the end, there was this question about, hey, how is this going to be used and what's the kind of the best way to use it? So decided that it would be good to, with the quarterly meeting that you guys have, it would be good to get it back in front of you so it could go right back in front of council before the next round of folks will be ordered up to do this starting in January. So I thought this was a timely way of sort of approaching this. And the crux of it is, if you see, you already had, or the council already had a resolution that was passed that in 2021 that adopted sort of the procedures that have to do with the observations, but silent, of course, on the form. And so we just added potential language for the use of the form and are putting it in front of you guys to see if you want to then get me to do a little bit something different before it goes in front of the council, or whether you guys want to advise this to go in front of the council or not. My suggestions are basically that because the judge is a contractor, but he's also a charter officer, you can avail yourself of executive session. So if there's anything negative to be said about him, it protects you to go ahead and use the executive session. The suggestion is if anything turns out unsatisfactory, that you send it through the city attorney so it stays confidential. And then that way, so anybody who gets the form says, okay, if you're going to say anything unsatisfactory, find anything is below par, then send it to me, and then I will make sure that an executive session gets set up so that you guys can have a conversation. And then, of course, if you're having a conversation about his evaluation of his performance, we would have to notice him. You wouldn't have to necessarily have him invited to that session, although what the law says about that is that you would have to give him proper notice of the session, and then he could ask you to do it in the public or not. So, and that's the way that works. So the suggestion is just use me as a tool to keep it confidential if it's going to be unsatisfactory, so that you can then avail yourself of executive session.
So one comment, they'll go to Council President Starr. So this would be consistent with how we do employment practices for other contracted or employed persons in the city. So they would have the same rights and process.
Yeah. So city officials basically do get that because they're your employees, and the law sort of recognizes, there's rights with employees that they don't want their dirty laundry aired, if they're doing something not up to par. And in the same right, you guys don't want to have to risk tripping over maybe something that might be defamatory or whatever. So the law allows for the direct hires, the direct appointees of councils to go ahead and have this option of executive session, unless, of course, that person then says, no, fine, let's put it in the public eye. But otherwise, yeah, it's the idea of treating everybody with that dignity and allowing that tool because they happen to be your direct appointees. So.
Appreciate the thoroughness that went into that. Council President Starr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. More just, I think, understanding for me. I get that. So on line 16 of the resolution, it says that the first meeting in January, every odd number a year, the mayor will announce 2 counselors to attend arraignments and/or hearings and check in with the judge for the upcoming year. That makes sense to me, and that's in line with you appointing or the mayor assigning committee assignments. I'm just curious about why we switch it up. Why we're announcing over a year in advance to counselors versus just announcing it every year.
I can answer that question. So the appointments for the biennium are made at the beginning of the 2-year
I
period.
recognize that one in the beginning of my statement.
Thank you. And it has been the practice to go ahead and make the appointments for the 2-year period. So it has been for year 1 to assign 2, and then for year 2 to assign 2. So it's done at the beginning of the biennium for the full 2-year period.
So my question is, I know this past biennium, we had one council member not do their evaluation.
Correct?
So I just am curious, so that 1 year, there was not a full evaluation, because my understanding is that assignment just carried over to the next year. So we had 3 people doing evaluations. I'm just curious if there's any, other than that's the way we've always done it, if there's any wisdom in just assigning 2 people per year, but not doing it 2 years in advance.
Thank you for that. Part of it is also when we do the 2-year, because this was year 1, so I just carried it over because that individual is not able to, for whatever reason, complete that assignment. So not assigning for the second 2 years probably would have not made a significant difference, but if I'm understanding your question correctly, is to do it at the beginning of each year and look at the availability of counselors to make sure that that would be carried out. And that would be a yes and at any point during the biennium at the request of a council member or in a conversation between that council member and mayor, the assignment may be changed. So that is not locked in stone. It's simply to set the plans for the 2 years, and then they can be altered as necessary during that biennium.
Well, I think my concern was that because the way I read this, you're going to assign you assigned 2 people back at the every odd number of years, so you would have done that in 2023. Correct. One person, one assignment did not get done, just didn't get completed. Mm-hmm. And so it carried over into the second year, which meant there were 3 people doing the evaluation, which is not consistent with the resolution, the way I'm reading it. So is there something in here that gives leeway for 1 year to only have one person do the observation? And then in the case that we experienced this year, that one was carried over and there were 3. If we're going to do that, we should probably have language that says we can do that.
Well, the way I read it, basically, it's somewhat open-ended, but it basically says that the mayor's part in it would be announcing the 2 counselors for each year, and then it's up to the counselors to report their observations by the second meeting in October of each year. So I guess depending on what you guys think, we could either put in other language that says if a counselor can't make that, a substitute will be provided, or...
But I don't think it should carry over and you have 3 the next year.
No, I get that, but I'm even saying we could even say by August, if these haven't been done, we could ask.
There you go, that gives it
something
2 months,
like that, yeah.
Right?
So if we want to add language like that, that would be easy to do too, just to kind of solidify what the process is. The other thing is, and what this doesn't say, but some places do this, is maybe a 3rd or a 4th counselor would want to go visit during the year, and we could also say evaluations could also be offered throughout the year, by any other counselor who also wanted to observe court. So there are places here that we could add if you guys felt like that would be helpful.
I think we should do that.
I'll go to Councilor Reed, and then I have a comment.
So, could we just say something, any adjustments that need to be made will be made by the mayor? And do we have to codify every little circumstance that might come up? Could we just say adjustments can be made?
Sure.
Give that some flexibility, but also visibility that, this may be a concern.
We can use words, lawyers like using words like timely and reasonable, so say something like timely and reasonable adjustments can be made at the mayor's discretion.
Yeah, that seems simple enough that we don't have to.
I just think if we're going to do it, we need to do it and not have it say something different.
Okay. So I'm writing down the words timely and reasonable adjustments.
And if, while you're doing that, as part of the conversation, one of the reasons we started assigning people was and having different people do that was partly to offer different points of view on the judge's work, but also to get counselors in to observe court because that wasn't happening before. And there was a benefit for having counsel engage with the judge, understand how this works, because I think it makes us better at our job. So this was a practice that I put into place in order to help make that happen, understanding that life circumstances and jobs and so forth, this is not the first time it's happened where a council member was not able to do that. But if we're putting this into a process, having a form where we have more tools for the counselors to be able to do this work, I don't want to limit it to 2, but 2 will be assigned. But of course, any counselor can go to any of these and turn in an evaluation if they so choose to do that.
So does that say then that any counselor can turn in an evaluation?
It does not. So if
There we go.
Let's make it available.
Yeah. If we wanted to put that language in, we can. How do you guys like this language if you were to do an as amended where I said timely and reasonable adjustments to the observing counselors may be made by the mayor to ensure at least 2 observations per year?
I like it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bingo.
Say what we're doing.
That works. I have one other change I'd like to suggest. This resolution is about process, but it doesn't give the why. So if somebody's going back and wondering why we're doing this, and they'd probably have to go tracking back to before, can we add a whereas about why we're even doing this right at the beginning? I was
Sure.
thinking something along the lines of, even at the very top, that whereas, the municipal judge is contracted by the city council, so they even know why we're doing this, rather than why doesn't it go to the city manager.
Okay.
And then the other reason is what I just said about making sure that we have understanding. So something the council desires a means of understanding and written documentation with clear, consistent expectations for council and in the relationship between the council and municipal judge. So the whole reason we're putting this into writing, that we have a form and so forth, this is all something that was done more ad hoc up until these last couple of years. So writing it down helps people understand why we're doing, what we're doing, and how we're doing it. Does that make sense?
Totally. So I heard a lot of language in the second one. I heard the first one was whereas municipal judge is appointed by the city council.
Right.
And whereas, and then,
So the council desires a means of,
Accountability?
I thought about that word, but I don't particularly care for it. If you guys like it, we can have that conversation. But I was thinking more along the lines of understanding.
means of,
The
you want to
role
say understanding and ensuring? Because part of this is trying to be knowledgeable about what one of your appointees is doing and whether or not it's falling within line with what the expectations are in the job description.
I'm okay with your word.
So understanding, and the, um, and see if you like this. Scope. So, whereas the council desires a means of understanding and ensuring this appointed position is performing in accordance with the council's scope of work.
Yes.
All right.
Bingo.
Very timely and reasonable.
Hey, thank you. Well done, Counselor.
Throw that in there. All right.
Thank you. So if somebody reads this cold, they've got a better understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
Anything else? So shall we move to,
Just one more thing here.
okay, go ahead.
Okay, so forgive me if I should know this already, but is there anything in here about the reporting at city council? Because this talks about the form and the filling out of the form, and the possible executive or not executive, but
It's right here.
okay, thank you. Which
Line
okay, line 2.
1 and 2.
Yes.
page.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So if nothing's unsatisfactory, then it can just come to you guys like you're used to, if that makes sense, under this language.
Yep.
Okay.
So motion to recommend adoption by the council as amended.
So moved.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Anything further? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed signify by saying no. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you for completing this. Really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely.
So, Mr. Cleaver, shall we go through the third quarter report?
All right, Madam Mayor, councilors, thank you. Of course, the city's been active in recruitment, and in particular, the Kaiser Police Department. I am happy to offer that in addition to what I put in the staff report, we do have 2 officers who started this month, one starting tomorrow. We may have this week as many as 4 active offers out to additional candidates. So their work interviewing and recruiting new police officers, both lateral and entry, I think is starting to really come to fruition. But of course, the city's active in other areas as well, including in public works with several openings. So again, very active on the recruitment, and as I understand, more active than usual for the city. And I am a product of that. Which takes me to the next item there, which is the transition, HR director transition. So Michelle DePina, now being the HR director emeritus, is serving as an invaluable resource to myself and also the city, working on some high priority projects. And of course, the new HRIS is one of those. And I'll, of course, be talking in some detail later on in the report on how that's going and where we're at, including the personal policy manual and some of our bargaining efforts.
Any questions on that? Okay. Council President Starr?
You're going to walk through the rest of it, right?
Yes, I was
Okay,
pausing for some
perfect.
questions. Yeah. Okay. On our policies and procedures, as we've indicated in prior meetings, the Personnel Policy Manual continues to be developed and updated, and we are nearing completion. Again, the next part of that is updating our leave policies to align with all the legislative changes that happened in the past year. and making sure those are up to date and, again, in alignment. And the timeline there is we hope to have those drafts completed and in front of the council for those pieces that the council needs to approve for review before the end of the year.
Thank you, Council President Starr.
So, Mr. Cleaver, this says that you're going to have those approval to the PPC shortly and then for council review before the end of the year. Does that mean the PPC will need another meeting before the end of the year so that we can review them prior to council?
Does the turn to our city attorney? Do we need another meeting of the PPC for?
It's just what it says here.
No, these, they're not slated to meet this calendar year after this meeting. So I guess it's really up to how fast you would, see the turnaround and whether or not there would be a value in having the PPC meet, or I know Councilor Reed is no longer going to be with us, and this was anticipated to be the final meeting of the PPC with her participation. So I guess it would be up to the PPC and you to figure out if it's doable to meet before the end of the year, and then, of course, what that would be, because if it's a Monday, the end of December is 2 days from Christmas, and then 2 days from the New Year's. So those aren't terribly open in some people's schedules. So that's my 2 cents.
So I might suggest that as this project starts to look like it's nearing completion, you could put, Ms. Bissett could reach out to us to see if there was a timely manner by which we could meet. If not, it'll go into January.
Are these changes that need to be approved before the end of the year so they can be effective January 1st?
They do not. So if it does happen
Okay.
where it happens after the year, there really isn't a timely portion other than we, of course, have our HR director, Emeritus, able to kind of staff and research and do some of these pieces. And
So even, because I'm just making sure, I just don't want us to miss anything. It says they need review in light of recent legislative changes. So the legislative changes are not effective January 1? That would necessitate the updates.
the updates that, or the legislative changes that necessitated the updates really center around Oregon paid leave and changes to Oregon Family Leave Act that occurred and went into effect on July 1st of this year.
Oh, so we're behind?
In terms of having a completed and finalized policy, I can say for sure we are applying the law as it is intended, but we do need to update our city policies to make sure that they are in alignment with those legislative changes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So as those near completion, let's just check in, and we'll see what we can do in terms of timeliness to move those forward.
Next on the report is classification and compensation. It states nothing to report at this time, but I will share, I've recently learned since submitting the report some details around some reassignments within Public Works Water Division that will, of course, require some analysis of impacts and potentially some classification reviews. So just getting into the details of that and working with our Water Division and Public Works Director to figure out what those changes are and, again, any potential impacts.
Sounds good.
Under labor relations, we continue to work with the Kaiser Police Association on a work after retirement or rehire memorandum of understanding, and that work continues and conversations continue with the KPA on that front. And in addition, as we've previously shared, we have our new sergeants union, and we will be bargaining with them very soon. Our first session is November 13th, where the city will be able to meet with their representatives to start working on a new contract. And that is part of the reason for the petition as noted in the staff report. This essentially clarifies that the Kaiser Police Association, the KPA, will be representing this new sergeants union for the purposes of the negotiations.
Counselor Reed?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is not really your wheelhouse, but I'm wondering about the budget and how these negotiations might affect the budget. Presumably, the negotiations are going to require more compensation in some form or another. Do we know if there is flexibility enough in the budget to cover those?
Well, and I think that level of detail will start to come out in the negotiations and what they're putting forth on the table in terms of a compensation structure.
Thank you.
Good question. All right. Anything further on the unions, labor negotiations?
Only one small but important detail. We do have our final collective bargaining agreement with LIUNA signed and posted and available on our website.
Fantastic. Okay.
On to benefits. Once again, this is an area that is absorbing a lot of time from our HR generalist, Kristen, and that requires just really a lot of communication and education for employees as they not only avail themselves of protected leaves like the Family Leave Act, but of course, Oregon paid leave. So what we want to do is continue to work on education information to help answer those questions for employees. It's really a time-intensive process to meet with an employee. It's also new for them, answer their questions, and we continue to act as a liaison between our insurance provider standard for Oregon paid leave and the employee to get those pieces done.
So one question I've got is, once we have the HRIS system up and running, will that make this a little bit easier?
Yes, I do think it will greatly help in terms of even as simple as providing some data on who is on leave, who's actually utilizing the benefit, which requires some really kind of hand tallying and tracking of various pieces, which should automatically come from the employee, basically using the system themselves. So right there, I mean, that should see efficiencies in some of the really kind of time-intensive administrative tasks that need to happen with this program.
Awesome. Thank you.
And speaking of the Human Resources Information System, since the last PPC meeting, the city did decide to push the initial formal launch to January 1st, 2025. And what that decision has allowed us to do is start to increase communication with employees and really kind of fine-tune some of the finer details of configuring the system, really, I think, to ensure that when January 1st comes around and that first paycheck is issued, that we've really paid employees correctly, which should be our goal. And that does mean we haven't stopped work on the other pieces, which include performance management, recruitment. We continue to work with the vendor on those pieces. And even more intensively, as noted in the report, we are adding additional meetings to our calendars to again work on those finer details of configuring the system and making sure we're getting it right come January 1.
Very good. Council President Starr?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In terms of percentage of implementation, would you say we're like 80% there? I mean, I know that it says you've pushed it to January 1, 2025. What percentage would you say we are for implementation?
I would say we are 90% the way there. We're really getting into, again, some of those finer details of, for example, how does somebody record, a particular coding on their timesheet, and how does somebody, avail themselves of, comp time versus overtime, and those are really, again, finer pieces in the KPA contract, the LIUNA contract, and getting those configured. And then, of course, training our employees to be able to do that. And that's what that additional time will allow us to do.
Is the employee training?
Right, and get some really kind of hands-on, get people familiar with the system. So come into December when people are actually putting in time cards, they're not left with questions or not knowing what to do. And I want to make sure that's as smooth as possible for our employees.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On that second paragraph, you talk about you continue to meet every Thursday with the People Guru implementation team. And then it says we have recently added a recurring Thursday morning meeting. Is that the same meeting or are there two meetings?
There are actually two meetings.
Okay.
The one is the overarching implementation, a bit broader in scope, whereas the second meeting is around really configuring the payroll pieces, where we're getting into some of those really finer detail questions.
Thank you.
And on to risk management. So we are coordinating with Oregon OSHA on continuing our Safety and Health Achievement Recognition Program, which is in our 4th annual year for the city. And our next steps there are really to get OSHA on site with some of our city employees, public works, and police and parks, really to have an expert consultation and do some walk-around site visits and provide some both guidance and evaluation of the city's safety practices, which are, of course, very effective, very efficient, as indicated by our participation in the SHARP program.
So tell me what it means for the city to graduate from the SHARP program. So having achieved it 5 years in a row, then it kind of goes in, we go into a different category for implementation, for monitoring. What does that look like?
So what that looks like is recognition from Oregon OSHA that we don't need to do as much intensive monitoring. And so part of their process is now they're up to a 58 really item questionnaire to evaluate the different practices and policies around safety. It becomes more of a self-monitoring program at that point.
Okay. Well done.
And as we last reported, CIS met with the city to discuss best practices and their recommendations on a number of items. And now that report is complete, we have their report, we have their recommendation. We are taking a look at some of those recommendations and where we can implement those, if that makes sense for the city, or continue further research and evaluation.
Council President Starr?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, Mr. Cleaver, the next to last bullet point item under that CIS, I guess, best practice evaluation, you list here implementing volunteer background checks. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely, Council President Starr. That, when it mentions implementing, is around, again, further research and evaluation of CIS's recommendation, which included some particulars on which volunteers would have background checks. And again, I think that's an item that needs further research and evaluation if it makes sense for the city and the volunteers that we have out there.
Thank you.
Councilor Reed? No. Okay. So this is following up on the ongoing conversation around why we even have that on our forms. And I believe, Mr. Lindsay, you sent out a very timely and informative email in that regard.
Yeah, and in it, I guess we could ask, is this the appropriate body to bring it to before we bring it to council as a whole, the idea, or whether or not the council as a whole should just hear sort of what we think is a recommended baseline, which is CIS's recommended baseline would be, if you have direct unsupervised contact with kids, that you'd absolutely want to do that. But otherwise, a lot of our peers do not do it beyond that, if at all, frankly, because of some of the cost and some of the time and the kind of administrative oversight of it. But that doesn't mean that we can't be leaders, in making sure that folks are going through background checks that definitely deal with vulnerable populations. So if we have folks like that, I think it would be a good practice. I know I've spoken with HR Director Cleaver. I always get that wrong. I want to call you Clever. But this notion that we actually really have a lot of people that we do background checks for, like in our actual employment workforce. It's this question that I was trying to answer in the recent correspondence is really about how much do we do that for people on our volunteer, say, boards and committees, because those are a different type of volunteer. And then other volunteers, we even have, people who will sign a waiver, but they'll only come out here and do the cleanup on one day. You know what I mean? And we probably wouldn't do that. So there is this notion of where is the best practice for and policy for that best practice and coming from our electeds on what they would like to see. So,
Councilor Reed?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So you brought up the Civic Center cleanup, and it would make me feel better if somewhere in the beginning directions or whatever, we made sure that kids, were or within the line of sight of a, trusted adult or something like that. Because I can just imagine that going south pretty quickly unless we had some kind of, I'm not suggesting that we have everybody do background checks for that particular event, but just as a best practices kind of thing to let kids know and let adults know to keep an eye on the kids too.
yeah, and part of my approach at the end of that correspondence to you guys was this notion of we can't always affect what we do with policy too, and so we can say, hey, a good example is if there's a youth liaison, right? And that's usually somebody between the ages of 15 and 18. And I know we've even had a moment maybe where the youth liaison, the parent couldn't come pick them up after a meeting. And so somebody says, oh, I'll just offer to drive them home. In an instance like that, I know in the past, somebody who has been backgrounded has taken them and ended up being our city manager, right? But I would suggest maybe we could write a policy that says maybe 2 adults, if we're not backgrounding volunteers on our boards, that 2 adults will always remain until the kid gets picked up or something like that. You know what I mean? So you can fashion your policies so that nobody has to be embarrassed and everybody knows what's expected of them. And in the boards and volunteer roles, that's sort of easy onboarding. In the case of a situation where it's a one-off and people just show up to do something volunteer-wise, maybe it's as much of a best practice, but in a form that's right by your sign-in sheet that says, remember, kids stay with parents or responsible adult that they know. You know what I mean? And just sort of advise people in a more general fashion, maybe with a sign or something. But we want to take cues from you guys on what some of those best practices might be and try to implement good policy as well as thinking about this bigger idea of backgrounding, which I think was when CIS came and did an internal, that was we had hundreds of things that we had, and that was one area that they asked us that we didn't have. And so it's good to kind of ask and see where we should go from here.
Follow up?
So I just so you know, I as a district employee, that is not okay. Even though I have a background check, I am not supposed to give any youth a ride home, whether or not in whatever context. So I think in order to again not split every little hair, that too deep policy is a really good one. To whether it's waiting or driving or whatever. I think that's a good general policy that can cover a myriad of circumstances.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to bring that up with the ELT as well.
Council President Starr?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you, Mr. Lindsay, expand what you mean, like, when you said that's the one thing they asked for that we didn't have?
So my understanding of when they came and did a audit of our risk management, just sort of the random annual audit, they had us fill out a whole questionnaire. And one of them wasn't whether or not we did particular background checks, but I believe it was whether we had a policy in place. And so I think that was the idea, is that we didn't really have a policy in place. And so in order to be as good as they want us to be and have every markdown, we should have a policy. And so that's kind of where we're at.
Follow up.
I think you asked a question on if the policy conversation should come to us first before it goes to council. Did we? I don't know that we got that answered for you.
Correct.
Okay.
Opinion?
I mean, we can give, here's my thing. The three of us, or this committee, is made up of council members. So I think delaying the conversation by having it come here first, and we only meet quarterly, and then going to city council causes me heartburn. But I review these policies every day, right? And so I think that it should go straight to the city council, because I really, when it comes to the safety of children and youth, I don't really have a tolerance level for kicking the can down the road to the next quarterly meeting.
Understood and agreed.
Councilor Reed?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is, just again, to kind of contextualize this is the Safety Committee, which is a city staff sort of function, and yet it kind of crosses both lines as far as it's also a council issue, because we do have the, but I'm thinking of Soggy Day in the Park, for example, which is primarily a staff activity with lots of volunteers. So, just again, just sort of, and maybe it is just the same across the board, but just to be able to kind of consider that, as staff versus council function, just so we're not missing anything, I guess. So just look at it with both of those lenses as we proceed with that. And I don't know that it does need to be different, but just looking at it with both lenses.
Well, and I would definitely say we do backgrounding, again, for anybody who's working with certain level of either vulnerable populations or even in like high security type stuff. We definitely do like all the nuts and bolts, of backgrounding for our employees themselves. Where the question sort of remains is there are certain levels of volunteers that I think are the province of the council, which are your appointed, panels, all of your committees and boards. And so that's one of the questions that I think you guys are the more appropriate policymakers for. And then there's other ones like kind of maybe citywide activities that we, get insurance from CIS for, like we actually get, or I guess it's safe, the workers' comp.
For the
insurance,
workers' comp.
But we would want to also be, I guess, at least kicking the tires on those ideas and seeing what makes the most sense in terms of those things too. But I think it's always great to come to our representative leaders in the community and see what we think is best for what we should be doing. So I don't think it's a bad activity to walk through together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And finally, speaking of workers' comp, last item on the report, we did have 2 new incidents this past quarter. Both sworn officers, once again, with just short time loss modified duty, and both are returned to work. The next piece was around our settlement agreement, as discussed at the last PPC. That is in its final stages. What SAFE has come to the conclusion to is settling this claim from 2021 at the amount there, the $23,050. And what this does with this settlement is resolves the claim as well as any future claims from the denied conditions. And so we shouldn't have any other exposure from this claim once that settlement is finalized.
It would be nice to have a pin in this one.
Yeah, for sure.
Counselor Reed?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So does this include any attorney fees? It's just that straight 23,000 for everything?
Correct.
There's no extra attorney fees here or there or wherever?
Correct, and then whatever happens between the claimant and the attorney, that $23,050, that is the full amount.
So we're not paying other than the 23,000. They can, okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any on top of that for that.
No add-ons. Okay, fantastic.
And then in further good news, we received $11,978 from SAFE for our annual dividend.
Hooray.
Thank.
That is the end of my staff report on that note.
Thank you very much, Council President Starr.
I just have a couple things to follow up on. The first one is in our minutes that we approved, we talked about a process being initiated to do an informal solicitation process with for insurance brokerage, and I'm just curious on the status of that.
Council President Starr, I will be initiating that process. I have not started it yet, though,
Okay, great.
but it will be done soon.
Great, thank you. And then my next one, I'm not trying to, I don't know why this one isn't setting well with me, and so I'm just trying to, I think, maybe understand and put a timeline together. In regards to the conversation about the policies and procedures still being updated, you mentioned that the policy manual needed to be updated in light of recent legislative changes, which would have made those effective July 1st. But I looked back in our July 22nd minutes, and there was nothing mentioned about needing to update the policies to come into compliance with state law that were effective July 1st. So I'm just trying to maybe get some clarity, and you don't have to answer it now, but what happened with that timeline? Because that just makes me nervous that we had laws effective July 1st. There was nothing mentioned at our last July 22nd meeting. And now we're still updating a policy manual to bring our policies into alignment with laws that were effective July 1st. Heartburn.
Oh, yeah. And so let me say this, just for the good of the order, is that, and this is a repeat of what Mr. Cleaver has said earlier, which is we make sure and we follow all of the changes to the law that Oregon protected leave kind of offers for folks. And right now, as I sit, I can't recall which policies might have been out of alignment with that. But this, and I don't know, like our current policy versus what was going to be suggested for the future best practices, and whether or not this is a double check on the future one. Because our current ones right now, as far as I know, don't offend the paid leave. What it is I think we were going to suggest a whole host of new changes to our policies, and I think those are being double checked for alignment with law. And I would have to double check with Ms. DePina on whether or not that's what's occurring, because I know that what we have in place, as far as I know, don't run totally afoul of the law, but I think there was a lot of, because our policy hadn't been brought up to speed in a long time, I think there was going to be a lot of suggested changes. And so I think it was going to be pretty rigorous. And therefore, I think there was some of that going on, which, because of the time it's taken, I think there was a double check on pieces of the law before it gets brought out into the daylight for you guys to look at. That's my understanding of it.
So nothing in the policy manual was out of alignment with state law.
Well, I cannot answer that fully right now because I don't have it right here in front of me. But my understanding was that this new policy, suggested policy, was going to have a lot of changes. And so I think that was the lift was we're waiting for this big lift. And so they're focusing on the new language, just to kind of suss out what's really going on behind the
Behind the curtain.
behind the curtain. Yeah, I did see Wicked this weekend. It was pretty good, for realsies. But no, I do believe that all of the attention has now gone to, because they were going to be doing this personnel, this overhaul of our personnel policies. And so I do believe that became the new focus. And so those changes haven't been implemented yet. And so I think they just don't want to implement any changes that run afoul of new law. Does that make sense? Now, I can go back and try to make sure and look at all the old law, but what we're trying to do is just pass a new one, or a new policy.
I think what I'm concerned about, just kind of breaking it down, is that here we learn about these policies and procedure updates to the HR manual, personnel policy manual. I asked the question about what legislative updates or when were those effective, because it was all about, do we need a meeting if you wanted them in effect, thinking that they were going to take effect in January 1st. But then when I asked the question, I find out that the laws were in effect as of July 1st. So my question is,
Why wasn't it brought up?
why wasn't it brought up in July?
I can sort of, I guess, answer again to try to take away some of the heartburn, is that in the conflict of laws and policies, right? It's sort of like, the state's supreme to the localities if they're preempted. In law, we have to follow laws over policies. So even if our policies are out of conjunction, we will follow the law. But if we have someone who I believe at the time was working towards other activities like HRIS and things like that, I think this got a little backburnered. And so I think that's probably why you didn't hear about it in July, but I don't know that for
And they
a fact.
just would like to know for sure that the policy manual that is currently in place is not afoul of the law that
Okay.
was effective on July 1st.
And I will make sure that we do that.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Anything further?
No.
I believe we've covered everything for this evening. The time is 6:54, and we are adjourned.